This is going to finish up the lesson 2.5. We're going to be solving absolute value functions algebraically. And so let's look at this first problem. We have y is greater than the absolute value of x plus 2 minus the quantity 3. And first step, just like when we had an equal sign between them, and we're solving the absolute value equations, we got to get the absolute value isolated. So we want this on the side by itself. And so I need to add 3 to both sides in order to accomplish that. That will cancel out these 3's and will give me y plus 3 is greater than the absolute value of x plus 2. And now I can split it apart into my 2 rules, but I need to say when I'm going to be using each rule. So when x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 0, I'm going to do the positive side. That's going to be y plus 3 is greater than x plus 2. But we don't typically like equations in this format. And so I need to think through how would I solve that first one, x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 0. So I'm just going to show the work of how I come up with this over on the side. So x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 2, and that gives me x is greater than or equal to negative 2. And so that is really what I am considering in that center spot. And so instead of writing it as x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 0, I am going to write it as x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So I'm going to rewrite that. 2x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So that's my first scenario. The second scenario, I have x plus 2. Well, if I've already covered greater than or equal to, the only thing I'm left with is less than 0. And again, I'm going to do that same thing where I solved that. And that gives me x is less than negative 2. And I'm going to rewrite that as x is less than negative 2. And that is whenever my y plus 3 is less than the negative of what's inside my absolute value. And I separate that with or. And so let's solve one side at a time, just like we did before. So subtract 3 from both sides. And I want to solve it for y because when we are graphing, we like y equals, or y is greater than. So we have y is greater than x plus 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Now let's take the other side. The other side is going to take a little bit more steps, as we first have to distribute that negative sign through the parentheses. And so it changes the sign on both x and the plus 2. So it gives me negative x minus 2. Y plus 3 is equal to, or is less than, negative x minus 2. Subtract 3. Y is less than negative x minus 3. So I have solved this algebraically. So when x is greater than or equal to negative 2, the equation is y is greater than x minus 1. when x is less than negative 2, we're going to use the equation y is less than negative x minus 3. And so that's another way of looking at the two graphs as we're coming into there. Let's do another one, and I'm just going to change it up a little bit. Instead of doing greater like we just did, we're going to do less than. It works the exact same, except for we are now dealing with less than. So first step is to get that absolute value by itself. So subtract 7 in this case. And so y minus 7 is less than or equal to absolute value of x minus 4. So the first scenario is when the inside of the absolute value is greater than or equal to 0. And we're going to solve that just like we did on the previous page. So add 4. And so x is greater than or equal to 4. The other scenario, or the absolute, or x minus 4 is less than 0, which we add 4 to both sides, giving us x is less than 4. So those are the two scenarios we are working with. Let's actually go through and solve each of these. And so on the first side, we have y minus 7 is less than or equal to x minus 4. And so I am going to add 7 to both sides. And so y is less than or equal to x plus 3. And then on the other side, we take the left-hand side, y minus 7 is less than or equal to the negative of the x minus 4. And so y minus 7 is less than or equal to, we distribute that negative sign through, changing both signs. And then we add the 7. Y is less than or equal to negative x plus 11. And so we have our solution is y is less than or equal to x plus 3 for when x is greater than or equal to 4, or y is less than or equal to a negative x plus 11 for when x is less than 4. And so the correct way to write it mathematically is underneath here. And tomorrow in class we'll finish up our assignment and start our review.